Today, we're removing your Classic Mini's radiator. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today on Classic Mini DIY. Today, we're going to be going over removing your Classic Mini radiator. Now, recently on my car, I sprung a leak on my radiator, and between the cost of getting it repaired or getting a new one, the new one ended up being basically the same amount of money, so I'm going to go ahead and replace the radiator on my car, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to show you guys exactly how to take the radiator out, and then in the next video I'll show you how to install your new radiator. Now, this job isn't especially difficult, however it does take a good amount of time, and it is a messy job, so you'll definitely be getting coolant everywhere, and you'll want to have some sort of catching mechanism for that coolant, some sort of catch pan, something like that. In addition, I strongly recommend having a floor jack. It's going to make getting down there and getting into the bottom parts of the radiator a lot easier. And finally, I strongly recommend wearing a set of like nitrile or latex gloves. I don't like to get coolant on me. I mean, some people probably don't mind, but I like my hands to be clean kind of after I finish the job. Just take off the gloves, toss them, throw them away. So let's go ahead and move out to the car, and I'll show you guys exactly what to start taking apart, and we can get that radiator out of my car. Alright, so now we're out of the car here, as you can see, and what we're focusing on is this side of the motor. You'll see your radiator sits right here. You have this bracketing system on top that connects it to the top of the motor. You have your thermostat housing and a hose here. Often you'll have a hose that comes from the top of your engine block all the way over and into the bypass hose that's on the back of your motor here. And then you have some miscellaneous mounting systems down at the bottom of your radiator. If you have a Mark 1, Mark 2 Mini, most likely it's going to be a two-piece shroud. So you're going to have a shroud up here, and then another piece that's a little bit lower to kind of complete this shroud system that wraps around the actual fan that pulls the air through your radiator. If you have a later car, this shroud most likely is a single piece and won't have a break in the middle of it, and that'll be connected all together, and you'll have to unscrew that to get the radiator loose. So the first thing that I like to take apart is the hosing systems and let this radiator start draining. Now if you have an earlier car, you probably don't have this, and this right here is a drain plug, and it allows you to drain all the coolant out of the system without taking apart any of the hoses or anything like that. If you don't have that, what you're going to have to do is disconnect the hose that connects to this piece right here on the back of the radiator. So this sits in like this, and this hose is down at the bottom back of your motor. It's probably one of the harder things to disconnect, so I just want to warn you, it's not especially fun to get down there, and that's what I'm going to have to do on this car. So the best way to get to that hose is to either kind of come down here if you have a long screwdriver to disconnect the hose clamp that's on it, or there's sometimes a hole in your wheel well that you can see kind of inwards and into that bottom hose system. So you can jack up your car and take a look through that hole and see if you can unscrew it that way. If you are replacing the hoses and you're replacing the radiator, you don't have to be especially careful not to ding the hose or cut it or anything. But if you're not replacing any of these hoses, like I'm not, you're going to want to make sure that you're really delicate with these and you don't poke a hole in them. Otherwise, you're going to have to order some new hoses too. So I'm going to start taking apart these bolts up here and disconnecting this hose. Once I disconnect that, we'll probably get some coolant down here. In addition, this hose right here that's coming from my block and going directly into this hose back here, that's actually the heater hose. So my car doesn't have a heater installed right now, but if yours does, this hose most likely comes up here, goes into your bulkhead on one of the two sides, and then comes back out and connects to the bottom over here. So it may look a little different on your car, but the same concept is these are going to have coolant in them. It's going to get a little messy. Just be prepared for that. So first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and jack up my car, and I'm going to get that hose that's on the back of this radiator, again this one right here on the bottom of the radiator, disconnected, and let that coolant start draining into a catch pan. Now keep in mind, coolant is toxic. If you've never worked with it before, animals do like how it smells, and if they drink it, it will kill them. So just keep that in mind. When you catch it, you're probably going to want to put it in its own container, and you can bring it to AutoZone or your local parts store, and they should recycle that for you for free. Awesome. So now we've got that hose disconnected on the bottom. And unfortunately, there wasn't an easy way for me to show you that, but I did want to kind of capture when all the coolant comes out, what you can kind of expect. The next thing is to start disassembling these things up here on the top of your radiator. So there's 2 screws here that go into the shroud. There's 2 that kind of mount the mounting system to your thermostat. You don't have to take your whole thermostat out if you don't want to, but if you need to change it for whatever reason, this would be a good time to do so. In addition, we'll take off this hose clamp, and I'll probably go ahead and take it off on the bottom here just so it's up and out of the way, and it's a little bit easier for me to get in there and work on the radiator and get it out. So let's go ahead and take those off. You may also notice I took my radiator cap off. The reason I did that is so that air can actually escape this and move and allow the coolant to drain out of this radiator and into the catch pan below us. So we're starting to see that the radiator is getting loose in here. Next thing that we're going to want to do is go ahead and loosen up the screws that are on your shroud. And these screws can be kind of a pain to get to, especially the ones in the back of the radiator. You're just going to need to kind of fiddle your fingers down in there and then get these unscrewed. And then once those come unscrewed, the next steps are pretty easy moving on from there. Also, I strongly recommend using a smaller socket wrench to get to these. It'll make your life a lot easier. Now one more thing, these screws are not really normal screws. You're going to want to hold on to these, try not to lose them. Your new radiator, if you're getting a new one, might come with some new screws like this, but if it doesn't, make sure you hold on to these. You'll be really happy that you still have these. I also just took off the overflow valve. As you can see, mine's pretty worn out and pretty much done. This allows your radiator to kind of regurgitate a little extra coolant if there's too much coolant sitting in the motor when it's running. So I'm going to go ahead and toss this one. Alright, so there's shroud, at least the top shroud, number 1. I'm probably going to go ahead and put another coat of paint on this to make it look a little bit nicer. So I'll set that off aside before it goes back in. Alright, great. So all of those shroud screws are out now. The next thing that we're going to want to do is just loosen the bottom mount to the bottom shroud of the radiator. So the way I like to do that is by taking off the front grille of my car and then reaching down underneath there to get those unscrewed. So let's move into the front of the car and I'll show you how to take your grille off. Alright, so the first thing that I need to do is get these lights loosened, otherwise I can't get my grille out of the front here. You probably won't have this issue, but if you have daytime running lights, something that's along the bottom here, you might have to disconnect and remove those before you can get the grille off. Now with my car, I've installed these little screws that go right on the front of the grille that hold it on. If you don't have those, you might have screws that sit here, here, and then around the body of the grille. But on my car, I got tired of having to take those out every single time I took off my grille because I do it when I work on the motor, I do it when I change the oil, and it just got kind of tiresome having to unscrew all those screws every time. So I am going to go ahead and unscrew these 2 knobs here. And they come with little rubber washers, and this is what the knob looks like right here. Pretty simple. And then my grille just kind of slides off of those 2 posts that it's mounted onto, like so. And now with my car, I have to kind of work it around these lights here, but yours should just pop right off and come right off the front there. And there you have it, one grille not on the car, and a little bit better view into the bottom of the radiator here. So unfortunately, there's not a way for me to show you guys the screws that are in here. However, I'm going to post a little diagram that should be like where my hand is right now, and that'll show you guys exactly the screws that I'm taking out of the bottom mounting system down here. Now, this is for the Mark I mounting system. In just a minute, I'll post the one that's for later models that's a little bit different. They opted to go with something that would reduce vibrations a little bit more. The Mark I's like to vibrate around the radiator system here. So I'm going to unscrew these two screws, and then once I take this out, I'll show you guys this mounting system, and hopefully it'll be a little bit more clear exactly what I'm unscrewing down here. Alright, so once you have those bottom screws out, everything's pretty loose in here, as you can see. However, it's kind of deceptive. It's actually not that easy to get out from here, but you're going to want to kind of work it around the shroud that's down there and work it past it, specifically that hose that's on the bottom corner of your radiator. That's going to be the hardest part to get past that shroud. If you can try and move the shroud out of the way, that's going to be your best bet. However, if you can't do that, you're just going to have to kind of work it around and get past everything. And there you have it. That was actually the easiest it's ever been for me to get this radiator out of this car. So keep that in mind. As you can see, this thing's all dinged up. It's really worn out. And the leak is somewhere around here. I'll probably test it out later to try and figure out where it's leaking. And here's the other side. So you can see I'm losing a little bit of fluid there. And then the number 23. Not sure what that means. Anyway, go ahead and set this off to the side, and we're going to inspect everything down here to make sure that everything looks good. Also, you can go ahead and take that shroud out as well. That's the bottom half of your shroud that mounts to the same bracket that your engine steady actually mounts to. Alright, so now that we have everything out of the car, I thought this would be a really great opportunity to kind of show you guys exactly what you're looking at here and how everything mounts together. Because this radiator can actually be kind of complicated in the way that it actually mounts. So taking a look at it out of the car like this is a really great opportunity. So obviously right here we have the actual radiator, and it sits in this orientation right here. And you have your front piece that mounts directly to your thermostat via this hose right here. That connects right to your thermostat, and then your engine block underneath that thermostat. And what happens is that thermostat, as your car gets too hot, it has a little thermometer inside there that actually regulates and knows when it starts to get over a certain temperature. So when someone says I have a 195 degree thermostat, what that means is that it actually opens and begins to allow coolant to pass by that thermostat at 195 degrees Fahrenheit. And so generally you have 195 in the winter, and then you have something a little bit cooler like a 165, so it opens sooner and allows your car to begin cooling much sooner in the summer. In my car right now I have a 195, which allows that coolant to pass by at 195 degrees. The coolant comes in this tube right here into your radiator. Air is blown over these fins right here, which cools that coolant down and helps keep your engine cool. And then that coolant is then passed through the bottom here and back into your motor, into your heater, all through this hose right here, which connects just like this. And so once the coolant passes through this radiator, moves into this hose, and you have two places that it comes out. This one right here goes to your heater, if you have one. And then because that coolant isn't actually really cold, what it is just cooled down, it's more acceptable for the engine running temperature, that is run into your heater, and then when the fan passes through your heater core, it warms up the air and then delivers you warm air in your car. This tube right here goes back into your motor, and then the coolant passes all through your motor and cools it down. And that's the basic principle behind this radiator, and really most radiators and how they work. Now, the next thing you have on this radiator is this overflow tube. Now, all the Minis have this overflow tube. Some run a little bit differently than others. So some will simply just mount to your shroud, and if you have too much coolant in your motor, it'll regurgitate it out of this tube right here, and honestly it just dumps it directly on the ground. And now obviously these cars are much older, and they didn't have the standards that said, hey, coolant isn't necessarily great for the environment. So when it just dumped to the ground, it was simply all right. Later model Minis eventually moved into having an expansion tank. And now this expansion tank is simply just something from an ATV, nothing too fancy, but the concept still stands. This would then be run into the bottom of your expansion tank, And when coolant regurgitates out of this, it actually runs down here and fills up this tank a little bit. There's a small vent on the top of this tank to allow air to pass out when the coolant comes in. But then once your car cools back down, the coolant is sucked back into your radiator and stored back in the radiator. So you don't lose coolant, you don't drop it on the ground, it ends up being a lot better. Earlier cars, like mine, sometimes people will add this, which I actually plan to do in the install video. And other people will install just a sort of a catch system where this just dumps directly into an excess container. And generally your car will only regurgitate coolant once after you fill it, and that's just it kind of finding its happy place with coolant. I'm going to install this expansion tank just so that I can maintain that higher level of coolant, and it gives it a place to go. Now the next thing, to kind of show you guys exactly how this mounts together. Now, on these Mark 1s, you have a two-piece shroud system. And so this actually mounts right down on the bottom, like this. And when that mounts down here, obviously your hose comes out the bottom here that goes back into your motor. And this part right here mounts to your engine steady. And this bracket is so difficult to get down and fix. As you can see, there's a screw that's worked its way out of my bracket here, which I'm going to go ahead and replace while I'm down here. Then these two screws right here mount directly into that engine steady. It's pretty straightforward stuff, but because it's a two-piece shroud system, it makes it pretty difficult to get this down into your motor and actually get everything mounted up. Specifically, on the sides, you have screw holes all along the side of your radiator, and these get screwed in right on the bottom. And you think, well, those holes line up pretty nice. Why is that so hard? I can assure you that once you get this down in the car, it is extremely difficult to screw those in. So just keep that in mind when you're starting to put this back in, and it's totally okay if it takes you a little while to get those done. Alright, that's it for Classic Mini DIY today. I hope you found this video helpful. Getting that radiator out isn't too bad, it just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of patience, as do most things on this Mini. Big thanks to 7 Enterprise for helping support the channel and for providing the parts that you see on this channel. They've been a huge help. Check them out. They have some awesome Mini parts. And as always, enjoy those Minis and motor on.